Okay, so let's get to eating disorders in athletes. I wrote a couple notes down, but I'll let you talk first. So then if you don't talk about them, I'll just bring them up. And you
Yeah.
also have the
So
same outline.
totally. Yeah. So eating disorders in athletes. When I was working at a higher level of care, again, I worked at the UCSD Eating Disorders Clinic in the adolescent team. I worked a lot with the athlete track, and it's significantly more prevalent. Eating disorders are significantly more prevalent in athletes than non-athletes. There's an even higher risk in aesthetic sports like gymnastics and diving and weight class sports like wrestling. It's we have to have our we just have to be aware with our athletes that this is something that could impact them.
Well, yeah, and they're very public. Like the more
Mm-hmm.
successful an athlete you become, the more public you become. So the more scrutinized you become. And
Mm-hmm.
then, as you and I and most athletes know, you have the way you look when you're engaging in the sport that you is your particular sport, and then the way you look when you're retired or taking a time out.
Mm-hmm.
And the first transition from that, from being an athlete to not being an athlete, for me, like I had never thought about my weight. And then I remember being in the pantry. We had a walk-in pantry, and I was sitting in the pantry, and I wasn't particularly hungry. And I was 16 as I quit swimming in high school because I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see what happened after 3 o'clock. And I was just, I was like, I love it, but I need to take a time out. So
Mm-hmm.
I remember being in the pantry and shoving food down my face and then looking down and my stomach was like over my pants and my pants felt tight, but I like didn't ever I've been very lucky to not have thought about my weight up until then. And so I
Mm-hmm.
remember I looked down and then I turned to my mom and I was like, Mom, am I fat? And she looked at me and she said, Are you hungry? And I
That's a
said,
great
No.
response.
I said, No. And she said, Well, then why are you eating? And I was like, I
Mm.
don't know. And so I really had to, after that moment, because I used, at lunchtime, you're eating like burritos and things like that. Your metabolism's insane also when you're in high
Mm-hmm.
school. So, and then if you're doing 2 a days, like that's a lot of calories that you need that day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I had to relearn my relationship with food and basically establish like what hunger feels like when I'm not in such an active state.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very interesting process. And also be patient to like stop eating just out of happenstance and the food's there and mindless eating and recognize that if I wanted my pants to fit, I needed to do X, Y, and Z, but it was interesting. It was a very interesting relationship that I had with discovering my body. And then I remember when I put on a swimsuit, what I felt like. And it was not the normal body that I felt. And swimsuits, you cannot hide anything. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a very uncomfortable feeling because then I started swimming again towards the end of high school. And so it was like this interesting relationship I had with all the things that, we're talking about with athletes. And that's just at a lower level, that's not even in the
Mm-hmm.
spotlight.
Yeah, you're bringing up such great points here. I mean, just like we go from being athletes who need so many calories because we're using so much energy. We have to replenish those energy stores as quickly as possible. And then suddenly if we just go from being an athlete to suddenly a non-athlete, what do you mean? Like we don't know how to feed ourselves because we lived our lives this one way for so long, and we see that so often with athletes going into retirement just not knowing like how do I feed myself, what are my hunger cues actually. So we see people like sometimes overeating, we see people sometimes under eating. I know when I quit swimming, I just suddenly wasn't hungry anymore. I was still eating, but like I lost so much muscle structure. I was like, wait, hold on. What's happening to my swimmer body? I've had these massive shoulders my whole life and now I just feel like I'm withering away. So it's such a shift that people go through when they retire or just step away from it because they want to, or
Mm-hmm.
are injured, or they have an eating disorder and they are not allowed to exercise. It's quite a shift that you have to go through mentally and physically.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because some of my guy friends, like when I quit, you just reminded me like the shoulders. So I'm a butterflyer,
Hmm.
right? So I remember when I quit, one of my guy friends was like, "Golden, your shoulders look so much better now that you're not swimming because you don't look like a linebacker." And I remember thinking, like, I don't remember thinking anything other than I had no idea my shoulders were so big to you. And if I want to go back to swimming butterfly, they're going to be big again. So like, I don't know why you're telling me this, but this is interesting
Hmm.
because I wasn't aware that I was being observed in that way,
Hmm. Yeah, the
right?
body
But that
comments are wild.
wild.
Hmm.
I got body and I got hair comments because I didn't know how to take care of my hair back then with the chlorine and everything.
Oh
So it
yeah.
was like once I stopped swimming, it was like, oh, your shoulders look better and your hair looks healthier. And it's like, well,
Yeah, right. Okay, first of all, the
I
body comments,
can't.
they gotta. Why are we talking about anyone's bodies? But I
Yeah.
got the same comments. I had someone say to me, "Wow, you look much less intimidating now that you've lost all your muscle." So I was like, "Wait, was I intimidating before? Is that a bad thing? Should I not gain muscle again? What do you mean?" And now here I am rediscovering my relationship with movement and exercise, and I feel so powerful with my muscles again. I'm like, wait, this is a good thing. I love this about me. So it's, just like, and these comments are often not meant to shame us or to put us down, but they impact us because they make us think about ourselves in a way that maybe we didn't even think about before.
Yeah, it's definitely a thought that wouldn't have naturally occurred if you had left me alone in a room for hours
Right.
and I was standing in front of the mirror. I would have never been like, what did my shoulders look like before? What do they look like now? I had never
Hmm.
analyzed myself in such a capacity. So it was very interesting to go through that, especially at such an impressionable age when everyone's kind of figuring themselves out, you
Hmm.
know? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like perfectionism and performance culture, the pressure no one talks about, like what we talk about, you're like in the spotlight, or even if you're not in the
Hmm.
spotlight, you're in a spotlight because you're in the arena, right? You're doing what you've signed up to do. How much of a role do you think that really plays when it comes to the eating disorders in athletes?
I think it plays a huge role. One of the lessons that we would share with our teens is that there are a lot of characteristics that make a great athlete that also make a great eating disorder. Like being like attentive to detail, like perfectionistic, able to persevere through discomfort, being high achieving. Those are all things that make a really great athlete. And it also takes those things to have a good eating disorder. And I put that in quotes because it's hard to say if there's a good eating disorder.
Right.
But a lot of those really positive traits can be capitalized on by the eating disorder. So the eating disorder can take those things and kind of run with it. So yeah, the perfectionism, the pressure, needing to feel as though you are being the best version of the athlete that you can be, or fitting the mold of what your sport expects you to be. It's a huge pressure. So you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about like the inherent pressures of being observed, like people watching you
Mm-hmm.
perform. So especially in sports where you're like getting judged by other people, like diving or dancing or just any
Ice
sport
skating.
where ice skating, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
gymnastics, again, that adds an added layer of I am being observed and judged based on who I am. It's not just about the performance. We know it's not. It's also about the way that you're coming off and the way that you're being perceived. Like, are you smiling enough? Or do you like have your hair in the right way? It's a lot. So it puts a lot of pressure.
Yeah, no, I can
Yeah.
imagine. And also, we're just talking about the observations we receive. So when you were talking about that, I was thinking like, yeah, if you are a swimmer because they're in these swimsuits, right? And you're just, going
Hmm.
about your business and you're standing behind the block and they're like, oh, well, why is she smaller? Why are her shoulders bigger? She's taller. It's just pure. And that's the nature of humanity, right? We observe. But
Mm-hmm.
then there's the judgments that go with that. And then there's the self judgments that go with that,
Mm-hmm.
in
Absolutely.
combination with this perfectionism and this performance culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to not compare yourself to another athlete who's maybe a little bit faster than you or performing a little bit better. Like you might look at them and say, well, if my body looked like that, maybe I would perform in that way. And then if we're not fueling ourselves well enough, there's no way that you're going to perform in that way. But I remember, I'm pretty tall. I'm 5'9". I remember swimming against people who were maybe like 5'2", and they would clean my clock. So again, there's like, there's a belief that you need to like look exactly like this stereotype of the athlete of your sport. You don't. like
No.
like like prowess in athleticism can be not just based on the way that you look. It's about the way that you use what gifts you've been given.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Very well said. There was something else I was going to say. It just escaped me. Maybe it'll come back. But yeah, it just when you were talking about how you were a certain height or whatever, it's funny because I'm 5'5", and so I would get behind the block, and even when we were younger, like age group swimming, people grow at different stages. So you could
Mm-hmm.
be taller than everybody and then everyone could be taller than you, or you could be shorter than everybody and then you just never catch up, or things like that. Um and I do remember one time doing like a training session during Hell Week, during the holidays when we would
Mm-hmm.
traditionally do our Hell Week. And I was solely eating bagels.
A
Bagels with cream
staple
cheese, bagels without cream cheese, bagels. So it's
staple
like
of the
bagels,
swimmer
yeah,
diet.
staple. And I started hyperventilating during this set of like 15 500s because my body just didn't have any protein. And I was going through the
Mm-hmm.
stages where I was starting to become a woman and my body needed iron. And so it was
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed that I was iron deficient from this. And so I had to make a concerted effort to change the way I was eating so I could feel stronger and eat more meat or strategically eat at certain days, of certain times if I wanted it to be reflected in my performance. And then I also have a funny story for the audience that when I first started training and then decided I was going to compete again and I was going to try to like get rid of all my crazies when it comes to competition, which did not work. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to diet right before this swim meet. And I'm just going to like, trim down and like whatever for no
Mm-hmm.
reason, just pure stupidity. And of course, in the middle of the 200 AM, it literally looked like after the 50 back, like somebody pulled the plug on me. And like, I did
Oh no.
contemplate, like, do I get out? And then I'm like, absolutely. The stubborn part of me is like, no, I'm not getting out. But it was just so stupid. And I knew by the end of the meet, like that, the whole approach was, you can't rob your body or deprive your body of nutrients and then expect to excel performance, in your performance. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that in that perfectionism thinking and in that athlete mindset, I can speak for myself. Sometimes I think that I can defy the odds and just wing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see you're not fooling anybody. And that doesn't apply to anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. No, you're special and different.
Right, right, right. We're all special and different, right? Which we are, but we're not, right?
Yes.
What would you say about body image and body dysmorphia in sports?
So, I mean, again, there's those pressures just to fit the mold. I think we talked a lot about just the comparison
Yeah.
between us versus them. It's like how do we change ourselves in some way in order to fit the mold? And so, again, it's like we feel like we need to be shaped this way in order to be a good athlete. So I'd say that it's tough to combat body image when it comes to sport because again we're on display, like we're
Yeah.
parading around in a swimsuit from the age of 9 to 22 was when I quit.
Yeah.
Like that, my whole life was just on display for everybody. So I think it's foolish to say that I didn't even experience like body image distress of just like
Oh,
comparing
yeah.
myself to one another. Yeah, it everybody experiences that in one way or another because we're always comparing.
Yeah. I mean, we
Mhm.
have eyes. that we
Yeah.
can use, and we have experiences that we have too, and they contribute to how we feel about ourselves
But
regardless.
one thing you said earlier really stood out to me. Like you wouldn't have had this thought about yourself if you were just left alone in a room.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and so unless we're told that like this is better than that, like why would we equate it to be like greater than or lesser than? And so I think one thing that is really critical to impart on just people in positions of power like coaches, teammates, educators, influencers, parents, just controlling the narrative and not creating dysfunctional commentary and like talking about bodies, like saying, oh, like, oh wow, you gained a little weight, like you could shave off a few pounds, or maybe you'd be faster if you weren't so chubby, like just things like that. Oh, sorry if you can hear my dog. She's
It's all
emotion
good.
minded.
It's all good.
It just commentary like that, just recognizing that you have influence over very impressionable youth. I think that's a really critical thing to recognize and start to shift. Like kids really hold on to the things that we say. So even if it's a comment in passing, they're going to soak that up like a sponge. So a lot
Yeah.
of body image distress can come from the narratives that we hear our parents saying about themselves or coaches saying about themselves or someone else. Maybe it's not even directed at that person, but they're listening.
Yeah.
They're always listening.
No, you're definitely right. I mean, my friends have even commented like if their mom was always talking about dieting or their weight, like how it affected them negatively and things like that. And that was something that I was very fortunate that didn't happen in my household. It was like you were
Mm-hmm.
either hungry or you weren't hungry. Did you want to eat or did you not want to eat? And I always wanted to eat, so it was never an issue. And I didn't there was always food out, so it's like you felt like you could eat when you were hungry and have that
Mm-hmm.
positive relationship. But I did have friends when I was younger come over, and they would like there'd be a candy bowl and they would like attack the candy bowl. And then my mom would let me drink Diet Coke and they were like, "Can I have a soda?" And I'm like, "Sure." And it was because of they were deprived, that it was such, you know, a I gotta have this. Like I got,
Mm-hmm.
it was so important to them. And I kind of equate that to like, the joke that when you send your kids off to college and they've been like under strict rule, and then they go to
Mm-hmm.
college and they like test every boundary possible because now they're free to roam about the cabin. It's kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that a lot when I was growing up too. I definitely grew up in a very like body positive household, and my parents just kind of, I mean, they really tried to get me to eat vegetables. I did not like vegetables as a kid,
See,
but
I didn't mind vegetables.
well, thankfully I found my way eventually. But
Yeah.
we had snacks, we had Pop Tarts, we had cookies, we had candies, and so like it was similar to you in that like we were able to just eat, and that was
Hmm.
okay. And I have a lot of friends who didn't have households like that growing up, and like their moms did make comments about their bodies, and I
Yeah.
feel grateful that I didn't have that. And I know that a lot of people do experience that because we're not the only ones who experience diet cultures. Generations before us dealt with diet culture, and
Oh, yeah.
it's always been there, and it's ever shifting and ever changing. And it's up to us to acknowledge, the narratives that we're imparting on future generations. Like, how can we stop it here? It's tough.